When a homeless man asked Bill Maher for just $1, he never expected his life to change because of the legendary comedian. It was a mild afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day when the sun was warm enough to chase away the cool breeze. Outside a quiet café on Melrose Avenue, a man sat at one of the outdoor tables. He wore sunglasses and a hat that partially shielded his face. He was unmistakable, Bill Maher. Though the years had softened the sharpness of his features, his aura was undeniable. Passers-by occasionally glanced his way, hesitant, unsure whether to interrupt the icon's moment of solitude. Across the street, another man went largely unnoticed. His clothes were worn, layered in a way that told stories of days battling the elements. His disheveled hair and the small cardboard sign in one hand revealed his situation. The other arm fidgeted nervously in his pocket. His name was James, and that day marked his third week sleeping behind the dumpster of a nearby convenience store. James hadn't had a full meal in 2 days, and the hunger gnawed at his stomach like a cruel reminder of his fall. As he scanned the cafe for someone who might seem approachable, his eyes landed on Bill Maher. At first, he hesitated. Why would a man like that care? He thought. But hunger has a way of wearing down pride. Taking a deep breath, James crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the table, his voice was barely audible. "Sir, could you spare $1?" Bill looked up slowly, removing his sunglasses. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment, James wondered if he'd made a mistake. But Bill leaned back in his chair, studying James as if trying to piece together a puzzle. The silence stretched, and James's anxiety grew. He was about to apologize and walk away when Bill finally spoke. $1, huh?" His tone was neutral, but there was a faint trace of a smile. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "Sit down, let's talk." James hesitated. The invitation felt surreal, almost like a scene from one of the movies he used to watch when life was simpler. He searched Bill's face for any sign that this wasn't some cruel joke. There was no malice there, just a calm curiosity. With a quiet thank you, James sat down in the chair across from Bill. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the cardboard sign on the table, trying not to draw attention to it. He felt the weight of Bill's gaze, but it wasn't critical. It was curious, as though Bill genuinely wanted to understand. James wasn't used to this. Most people avoided eye contact or tossed a few coins his way without paying attention. Nobody wanted to hear his story. But there, under Bill Maher's steady gaze, the words started spilling out before he could stop them. "Sorry if I bothered you," James stammered, his voice hoarse. "I don't like asking, you know. I've been trying to find work, but it's hard. Harder than I thought." He looked down at his hands, ashamed to seem so desperate. Bill didn't interrupt. He just listened, something most people hadn't done in years. James took a deep breath and continued. "I used to be a contractor, had a crew, steady work. But then the recession hit. The jobs disappeared, the savings ran out. Then came the late notices, the evictions, and the rest you can probably guess." Bill stayed silent, but his eyes softened. James tried to shift the conversation. "I know you must get approached all the time. I don't want to be just another guy asking for spare change, but I don't know what else to do." Bill leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. The air between them grew heavier, as if the world had slowed down for this moment. James expected Bill to hand him $1 and send him on his way, like others had. But instead, Bill asked, "What's your name?" James blinked, surprised by the simplicity of the question. James," he murmured, almost in a whisper. Bill nodded slowly, repeating the name. "James," he said, as if testing the sound. "You know, I've played many characters in my life. Cowboys, detectives, soldiers. And what I've learned is that each one of them had a story. Good, bad, ugly. It doesn't matter. What matters is how they choose to carry it." He paused and asked, "So, tell me, what's the next chapter in your story?" James looked at Bill, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Next chapter?" he echoed, incredulous. "Yes, you're still here. You're breathing, talking, asking for $1. That means your story isn't over yet. So, what's the next chapter?" James felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know how to answer. It had been so long since he'd thought about the future. "I don't know. I just want to survive today." Bill narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "That's not a chapter, James. That's a sentence. You need a real chapter, something you can build on." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the table. "Go here," Bill said, firm but kind. "It's a shelter run by a friend of mine. They'll help you get cleaned up, find a job, maybe even a place to stay, but it's up to you to take the first step." James stared at the card, his hands trembling. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice choked. Bill's expression softened. "Because someone once did this for me, and I wouldn't be here today if they hadn't." James hesitated, his fingers hovering over the card, full of doubt. Could he trust this second chance? "Can I really trust him?" James thought silently. "I don't know, man," he said, shaking his head. "I've tried places like that before. They don't really help people like me." Bill's gaze remained steady. "People like you? What does that even mean?" James swallowed hard, avoiding eye contact. "You wouldn't understand. Guys like me, we're just forgotten." Bill leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. "You think I've never been down? You think I don't know what it feels like to carry the weight of the world and have no one there to help you lift it?" James looked up, surprised. Bill's face, though composed, bore the weight of his words. "I grew up dirt poor during the Great Depression," Bill continued. "I know what it's like to go to bed hungry, wondering if tomorrow will be any better." He paused before finishing. "And let me tell you something, James. It doesn't matter how hard you fall. What matters is whether you're willing to get back up, even when the odds are stacked against you." Bill's words hit James hard. He opened his mouth to argue, but realized he had nothing to say. Bill leaned back in his chair, softening his tone. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. But here's what I know. Life isn't fair, and it never will be. The only thing you can do is decide whether you'll let it break you or make you stronger." James felt tears forming at the corners of his eyes, but he quickly blinked them away. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice cracking. "No, it's not," Bill agreed. "But simple doesn't mean easy. It's hard as hell, but if you don't try, you'll never know what could have been." James looked at the card again, his mind racing. He thought about the nights he spent sleeping on cold concrete, the meals he scavenged from trash cans, the faces that turned away from him every day. Now, here was this man, a stranger, a legend, telling him he was worth more than all of that. For the first time in years, James felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps it was just the realization that he had nothing left to lose. "I'll think about it," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Bill nodded as if that was enough. "Good, that's all I'm asking for." James gripped the card tightly as he stood. He hesitated, unsure what to say or how to feel. "Thanks for listening," James finally said, his voice nearly drowned out by the noise of the street. Bill gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Take care, James." As he put his sunglasses back on and returned to the cafe, Bill's hand trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. His jaw tightened for a moment, holding back a flood of emotions. Sitting alone again, Bill let out a slow sigh, his gaze lingering on the empty chair where James had been moments earlier. Memories of his own past surfaced. He had been younger than James when he first learned how cruel life could be. Growing up during the Great Depression, Bill had watched his parents struggle to put food on the table. There were nights when all they had to share was a can of beans. Yet, amidst the hardships, there had been acts of kindness that made all the difference. A mechanic had offered Bill his first job, cleaning tools. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him something invaluable: the dignity of work, no matter how small. Now, decades later, Bill carried those lessons with him. Helping James wasn't about charity. It was about offering the same chance that had once been given to him. Meanwhile, James wandered aimlessly through the streets, the card still clenched in his hand. He passed storefronts and caught glimpses of his reflection, tired, worn, defeated. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something new. He stopped outside a laundromat, staring at the blinking neon sign. With the little money he had, he decided to wash his clothes. If he was going to show up at the shelter Bill had mentioned, he wanted to look presentable. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first visit to the shelter was overwhelming. The fluorescent lights, the sound of hurried footsteps, and the constant hum of voices made him feel out of place. But the staff was kind and didn't judge him. For the first time in years, James felt truly seen, not as a problem, but as a person. Days turned into weeks. The shelter helped him secure a temporary job at a warehouse, where he proved to be reliable and hard-working. With the money he earned, he moved into a modest shared apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over his head and a step towards stability. All the while, James thought of Bill. He kept the business card, now worn and creased, as a reminder of the moment that changed his life. One evening, after a long shift, James sat down and wrote a letter to Bill. He thanked him for the kindness shown that day at the cafe and shared the progress he'd made. He didn't expect a reply, but writing the letter felt like closure, a way to honor the man who gave him a second chance. Months later, Bill received the letter. Sitting in his office, he read it carefully, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer alongside other cherished memories from his life. For Bill, it was never about recognition or gratitude. It was about paying forward the compassion that had once been shown to him. James's story didn't end there. Inspired by his own journey, he began volunteering at the same shelter that had helped him. He shared his story, offering the same encouragement Bill had given him. The cafe on Melrose Avenue remained a quiet spot for unsuspecting passers-by. But for James and Bill, it would always be the setting of a moment that showcased the power of human connection, a simple gesture that changed lives. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every interaction helps us reach more people and inspire more hearts with transformative messages. Together, we can create a ripple of kindness, empathy, and learning, impacting lives and building a world where stories like this remind us of the power to change and make a difference in each other's lives. Your presence here is essential to that purpose.